Good morning. Welcome at the OpenSSL Conference. My name is Marcel Kolaja. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for Europe at Access Now, and indeed I served as a member of the European Parliament from 2019 to 2024. Today we're going to speak about how the European Commission is planning to break cryptography this time. The talk will focus primarily on the recent development of political narratives around securing access to encrypted data by law enforcement, the plan of the European Commission, which is called ProtectEU, that's the European Internal Security Strategy by the Commission, and the impact on privacy and security. First, let me introduce briefly Access Now. We are a digital rights organization. We're a civil society organization. We defend and extend the digital rights of people and communities at risk. We're a global organization. We are officially registered in 4 countries, but we operate in all regions worldwide. And I am established in the Brussels office, where my team and I cover EU policies, and we work on advocacy, especially in the European Union. So first, let me say that crypto wars, in other words, the way how policymakers sometimes approach cryptography, that they basically take it as a security threat rather than something that brings security, is not new. But I will speak only about the recent development in this area, and will focus specifically on the efforts of the European Commission to resolve access to encrypted data by law enforcement. It, to a huge extent, boils down to end-to-end encryption, and we will also talk a bit what the narrative around how to access that data should be technically implemented, but don't expect a technical talk. It will be really vague. So, in June 2023, the European Commission set up a high-level group on access to data for effective law enforcement. So this is a body set up by the European Commission that basically should consult and come up with recommendations. So the group is tasked to explore any challenges that law enforcement in the Union face in their daily work in connection to access to data, and explore and contribute to finding potential solutions to overcome them, with the aim of ensuring the availability of effective law enforcement tools to fight crime and enhance public security in the digital age. That's a quote. There will be many quotes from what the Commission says. So I am basically presenting, the facts, how the Commission puts it. The title of this presentation apparently is quite provocative, but I will let you to assess whether the title is fair or not. You will see. So now, next, in May 2024, this high-level group adopts a set of recommendations, including establishing a research group to assess the technical feasibility of built-in lawful access obligations, including for accessing encrypted data for digital devices. And then in June, the Council of the European Union, which, for those who are not familiar how the EU is governed, Council of the European Union is a body in which the ministers of respective member states meet. So they held an exchange of views on the recommendations of this high-level group, and one of the priorities that the Home Affairs ministers identified is establishing legally and technically sound solutions for accessing encrypted electronic communication in individual cases and subject to a judicial order for the purpose of preventing, investigating, and prosecuting serious and organized crime and terrorism. That's a quote again. All right. Then, in the meantime, what happens is European elections. And there's a major political shift that takes place in 2024 in the European elections. You can see on the picture that comes from Wikipedia, you can see the composition of the European Parliament as it was post-Brexit in 2020. The colors are political groups, and they are ordered in a left-right order how you would or how political scientists would assess the political groups. So basically what is on your most right-hand side are the most, I would say, far-right members of the European Parliament. On the left is the most extreme left. And there is a spectrum in between. And you can see that in 2024, this all has shifted. So the yellow color, I think it's yellow, I'm colorblind, so sorry. But what I think is yellow, that is Renew Europe, which is a centrist political group. So you can see that before the elections, it was slightly shifted like towards the right, the composition of the European Parliament, after like heavily shifted. The blue next to that yellow is the EPP, the European People's Party. That's the biggest political group in the European Parliament, and they are a conservative political group, and their effort has traditionally always been to pay attention to security, at least in the way that they look at it, not necessarily the way that we look at it. And this securitization narrative has strengthened heavily after the elections. So it strengthened also the political appetite for lawful access to encrypted data, even though, at least to my opinion, it removes security by definition. We're talking about the von der Leyen Commission 2, so the president of the European Commission is the same because the previous one was von der Leyen 1, but the political agenda has shifted heavily. So, about ProtectEU. So as I said, ProtectEU is the European Internal Security Strategy, was published by the European Commission on the 1st of April 2025. Unfortunately, not as a joke. It replaces the European Security Union strategy, which led to the proposal that was named, at least in the digital rights sphere, chat control. The official name is Child Sexual Abuse Regulation, because of course, if you want to control people's communication, you always have to somehow wrap it in something nice. And the aim of the regulation, I think all of us would agree, is good. However, it is known in the digital rights community as chat control because what exactly it is about, to a huge extent, is actually access to private communication to search for child sexual abuse material. We will not talk about that, though. We will talk about the European Internal Security Strategy. So it sets out the objectives and actions for the next years to ensure a safer and more secure Europe. That's the official motto of that. And the Commission will present, according to this strategy, will present a technology roadmap on encryption to identify and assess technological solutions to enable lawful access to encrypted data by law enforcement authorities in 2026. Now, in my opinion, this political narrative contrasts heavily with the technical reality, because the objective that the Commission states cannot be achieved without weakening encryption and therefore weakening security. So it's basically trying to achieve security by weakening security. I also need to say that in the strategy and all other communications of the Commission, they always put this provided that fundamental rights are protected. I have removed those because it will make the text not necessarily short enough. It will be unnecessarily long. But also, I need to say that even though the Commission claims this, I think it's very difficult to imagine how that would work in reality technically. So what is the potential impact of this security strategy and what the Commission wants to come up with the roadmap in 2026 if they basically go in the direction that is at the moment the most debated, which is client-side scanning. Everybody knows what client-side scanning is, or I should explain? All right. So what the Commission is targeting to a huge extent is end-to-end encryption. And if you have communication end-to-end encrypted, then the question is, with the objective that the Commission has, how do you access data that is in the communication, given that it's encrypted, while, as the Commission says, not breach fundamental rights, especially the right to privacy. And one of the solutions that is debated is so-called client-side scanning, which means that you have end-to-end encryption, so you have the two ends, but you actually extend the ends, and you put a client application next to the original ends that work with the data unencrypted, because it's before it got end-to-end encrypted. So therefore, the client could do stuff like hashing the content and trying to compare the hashes with some sort of a database and so on. But it essentially also breaks encryption. The reason why it breaks encryption is because now it's no longer end-to-end encrypted communication, because the ends are elsewhere. So you have somewhere in the middle to somewhere in the middle encrypted communication, not end-to-end. So I would say that weakening encryption is detrimental to fundamental rights enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, especially Article 8 and Article 11, that speak about protection of personal data and freedom of expression and information. And I would also claim that there is no technical lawful access to end-to-end encryption possible without breaking privacy and security. This client scanning does not resolve the problem because it breaks privacy and security by definition. If you introduce these extended ends to that end-to-end encrypted communication and you no longer have end-to-end encrypted communication, of course, you create new possible vectors of attack on the client so that the attacker could get access to the encrypted data before it gets encrypted. There is a risk of disproportionate surveillance and lack of judicial oversight. We see it very often that the legislation aims at the legislation that is aiming at surveillance often comes with some sort of safeguards. But those safeguards are hardly ever respected, and therefore, especially in member states where I think we can debate the level of democracy and the stability of the democratic regime, then the lack of judicial oversight, for instance, is something that is incredibly problematic. Now, of course, companies may also avoid Europe for their business, or implement weaker security, which would lead to innovation slowdown. So despite the fact that the European Commission has very high on their agenda competitiveness of Europe and fostering innovation, it's my belief that this security strategy basically brings us to a state where innovation is basically slowed down. Another thing that is a potential impact, but I think very highly probable, is research funding shift. So instead of funding research on strengthening security, for instance, stronger algorithms, better protocols, the funding would shift to access to encrypted data. And then my last point is potential danger for free and open source software. Because imagine that you have client-side scanning mandated by law. So you have to implement client-side scanning. But then, if the software is open source and you consider this a flaw, vulnerability, or a bug, then you can just remove it, which, well, I would consider, to be honest. But then that client no longer complies with the law. It's practically unenforceable because, of course, you can spread the code on the internet, in Git repos or wherever. But then the Commission would have to do something about it. And then the most probable solution is basically target app stores, where they would have an obligation to basically make sure that the applications comply with the law and block those on the app stores that don't. This comes as a, in contrast of open source development, where you should be free to develop. And of course, a last resort that this could lead to if the Commission comes, or the policymakers in general come to the conclusion that proprietary software is by definition actually more secure, because there is control over what is on the clients, and the users cannot change it because they cannot change the source code and compile it for themselves. Because regardless of what the distribution channel is, let's be fair, this is always an option. You can just download the source and compile it for yourself without that client-side scanning part. Then, of course, how do you resolve this? Honestly, I don't have an answer, but I am pretty sure that no solution would actually be in favor of open source software in general. So now, what we need to realize is that we need to frame the debate correctly. I'm sure we'll be running into debates and arguments as we go, because the Commission next year is supposed to publish this technological roadmap. And I see several major flaws in how the debate is framed. These are just the four biggest, I think. So, strong encryption is essential for security and protects national security. So, because encryption is a mathematical process, it cannot be selectively applied, so any demand for backdoor that only works for the government is essentially at war with the mathematics. And here we can see how the official narrative that, that law enforcement needs access to encrypted data is in contrast with achieving the goal of higher security, because this goes against security. Now, giving law enforcement exceptional access threatens human rights and democracy. I already discussed that in the previous slide. Encryption is critical to democratic governance and the protection of the right to privacy and the right to freedom of expression. in the digital age, so weakening encryption through exceptional access mechanisms jeopardizes these basic human rights and democracy as a whole. Third, strong encryption actually strengthens privacy and security. The framing very often is that this is privacy versus security, which, by the way, is a debate that is very difficult to win, because politicians, and I would even say people in general, usually choose security if they have to choose between the two, especially when it comes to sensitive things like protection of children. But that narrative is absolutely inaccurate, because encryption actually strengthens security. It's more of a security versus security debate. And I would argue here that by weakening encryption, you may gain something that you may think is increased security so that law enforcement can access encrypted data, but you lose a lot on the essential security of the whole solution. And last one, it is, we're told always that we need it so that criminals can be caught. But backdoors to encrypted systems will not stop criminals and terrorists from using strong encryption. It's as easy as that. So what can be done? Support civil society organizations, coalitions, and networks. I named a few, but there's tons more, of course. Access Now, the organization that I work for, Center for Democracy and Technology, Internet Society, Article 19, Bits of Freedom, Electronic Frontier Foundation. There's a Global Encryption Coalition, which all of these are members. There's a network of digital rights organizations in Europe, EDRI, European Digital Rights. There's many, many more. So if you're interested, read their newsletters, follow their social networks. If you're companies and you have some spare funds, then I would also encourage funding these, because it's in the interest of your business in first place, and second, these organizations, especially after the political shift around the globe and the dissolution of US aid, for instance, in the United States, these organizations often are in need of more funding. But this is not a fundraising talk, so I'll stop here. What, of course, is needed is advocacy efforts, but this is exactly what these organizations do. They talk to policymakers, they participate in public consultations, they raise public awareness, but this is also something, of course, that you can do on your own. But organize, and support these organizations, I think, is a pretty effective way how to do this. This was my last slide. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them if I have the answer.
With your experience in the EU Parliament, what do you think is going to happen?
So the question is, what is my experience in the European Parliament and what is going to happen? So the interesting fact about the European legislative process is once a proposal is drafted and published by the European Commission, so there's an actual proposal, that the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union have to process, amend, and then agree on a compromise that then becomes the legislation. It's very difficult to stop it. It almost does not happen. I mean, you can count on, your fingers on one hand, how many times this happened, like in the recent past years. The process is designed in that way that rather these institutions that are responsible, they amend the legislation in some way, but the legislation being rejected is very, very rare. So if the Commission proposes something under this political climate with the so-called securitization narrative, we are in very dangerous times that something can be adopted. To what extent this would be really jeopardizing everything that I have stated in my talk, that will have to be seen, because, well, it will take years to adopt the legislation. And in that process, we really need these civil society organizations to advocate for human rights, for open source, for free development. There is a question over there. If I can ask you to wait for the mic.
Would you speculate on how willing the big tech companies, in particular, say some of the big US tech companies, would be willing to sort of play ball with this new legislation, or whether they would advocate a different position?
That's a really difficult question. After also the political shift in the United States, where we can see a lot of, like, at least indicated compliance from the CEOs to the current president of the United States, and basically applauding whatever that the current administration proposes. Well, I think business always follows money, right? That they are here for profit. So my understanding of the situation is, of course, they will assess what their business interests are, and they would advocate one way or the other. And at the same moment, if it is adopted, then, well, the EU is a massive market. It's a huge market. I mean, like, I hear whining of large corporations, like, we will withdraw from the European Union if this gets adopted or that gets adopted. That's not usually what businesses do. Sometimes, yes, but usually rather like smaller companies. But the big ones, they want the customers, they want the money. So they usually, comply in the end because they have no other choice. I mean, we're a democratic space. You cannot like work as a business without complying with the law.